In case you are unaware, the original Star Wars film was a phenomenal success. That success meant that George Lucas's hoped-for sequel could become a reality. Also successful, although not quite as much as the film, was Marvel's comic book adaptation. That was just the beginning of a series that would go on to outlive the films and would also include an adaptation of Lucas's sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. The success of Star Wars ensured not just a sequel, but an entire merchandise-driven franchise. If a child could wear it, sleep in it, eat it, watch it, play with it, or read it, you could guarantee that Star Wars' name could be slapped on it. It turned toy company Kenner into a global player, made George Lucas a multi-millionaire, and, so some say, saved Marvel Comics from bankruptcy. An initial 6-issue adaptation became a series that lasted nearly 10 years and over 100 issues. Roy Thomas and Howard Chaykin, our creative team from the adaptation, sent our heroes and villains on brand new adventures from issue 7, introducing new characters and worlds along the way. So it was somewhat inevitable that an adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back would feature in the series. And it did, but not just there. Issue 39 of Star Wars comic, the beginning of a 6-part adaptation, was released in June of 1980, a month after the film had premiered. Not long after that, the entire 6-part story was collected together and released as a Marvel Special Edition. I don't have that, but I do have this. An almost identical reissue of the Special Edition, released later that same summer as part of Marvel's Super Special title, a series that included a number of film adaptations in its run. But that's not all, as in addition to this oversized edition, there was this undersized edition. In the format of a paperback book, this was actually the first collected version of the adaptation, hitting the shelves before either of the magazine-size editions. So why am I showing you all of these? To show off? No. No. Despite the fact they're all the same adaptation, they are not identical. The colours are all different. There is additional artwork in this version, not in the others. And this version, apart from having a totally different layout, well, just wait and see. The creative team that brought us the early issues in this series have now gone, and instead we have series editor, former Marvel editor-in-chief, and creator of Power Man, Archie Goodwin, on writing duties, along with Al Williamson's art. Al had made a name for himself working in mostly science fiction and horror titles, such as Creepy, Eerie, and Flash Gordon. Those of you who have seen part 1 of my Secret Wars review, or my 7th Voyage of Sinbad review, will know how much I like a panel-by-panel comparison when more than one comic covers the same story. And boy, this one's a doozy. We all know, don't we, that the opening shots of The Empire Strikes Back show the Probots being launched from the Imperial Star Destroyer. For some reason, in this adaptation, they skip that part, and the very first shot, if you like, of the adaptation is on Hoth, as Luke, on his Tauntaun, sees one of the meteorites land nearby. In fact, even the opening crawl of the adaptation is shown against a Hoth background. Before that, though, we have this nice frontispiece, this nice title page, I suppose, which, interestingly, in the magazine version, we are only shown in black and white. Another big difference throughout the 6-part adaptation compared to the magazine version is the colours. Now, the colourist on both of them was Glynis Wine, and it's the same colouring, but due to the printing process, the colours in the magazine version are much, much stronger than the softer tones that are in the comics. The colours in the novelised version are also stronger, although they aren't provided by Glynis Wine. Instead, that job was left to Carl Gafford, and you'll see a few instances of the different approach he takes to colouring the story to Glynis Wine. You'll also see, in all 3 versions, some familiar dialogue, of course, but also some unfamiliar dialogue, some alternate takes perhaps. For example, from the very beginning, Luke says to his Tauntaun, "Easy girl, it's just another meteorite. They fall on this place about as regularly as the snow." Another necessary difference you'll see between the novelised and the non-novelised versions is the layout of the pages. Of course, the novel was a different proportion, and also the pages were smaller, so sometimes just shrinking the pictures wouldn't have worked on that smaller page. Sometimes that means that we lose things in the novelised version, such as Luke's hands, and sometimes, like this otherwise hidden X-Wing fighter, we gain things. Anyway, on with the story. Oh, by the way, when it comes to the story, I'm not going to explain it because I'm assuming that we're all familiar with the story of The Empire Strikes Back. For example, I'm not going to say, whoa, and then, you never guess what, he sees the ghost of Ben Kenobi. You know that's going to happen. But we'll track the storyline throughout it, of course. As I've already said, we begin with Luke on Hoth, and we see him being knocked from his Tauntaun, before getting our first view of the Probot rising from a steaming crater. Things take a bit of a diversion from the familiar when we catch up with Han in the Rebel base. For example, who is this guy he's talking to? Isn't he the one that we all had a figure of as a kid? Well, he's now been promoted in the film, not literally, and it's he that has the conversation with Han about the fact that Han has to leave because of the bounty on his head. And it's him that mentions Han running into a bounty hunter on Ord Mantell, rather than in the film when Han says that. Although it does still keep the line about a death mark is not an easy thing to live with. So what gives? Is there an alternate take of this in existence, a deleted scene? Possibly. But as with the original Star Wars film and its adaptation, they weren't working from the finished film. They were working from the screenplay. Sure, some shots had been completed, quite a few actually. But in terms of the screenplay, some lines were changed at the last minute, and so aren't included in here. And also other lines, there were a few different versions that they tried out. But what was on the script, on the screenplay, when they started adapting it into this series, is what we get in the comic. For example, Han says to Leia that he has to leave because every day Jabba the Hutt sends out more remotes, gank killers, and who knows what else. I assume he doesn't mean gonk killers. They wouldn't be hard to outrun, would they? And it's about now that if you hadn't noticed it before, you do realise two things about the art. One is that some of these shots are taken from actual shots from the film. That's clear. But also the quality of the artwork is so much better in this adaptation to the original Star Wars adaptation. The art in that, by Howard Chaykin, had its moments, but it also had its moments. But here, Al Williamson delivers again and again and again, as he went on to do in the subsequent adaptation of The Return of the Jedi. Oh, what's that? Looks like a Wampa's arm. We'll come back to that. I've already mentioned about the difference in approach between the two colourists, between the comic and magazine version and the novelised version. And now, joining Luke in the Hoth Wampa's cave, we really see how differently they approach some of these scenes. Glynis Wine gives us very natural, accurate colours, I suppose, for, say, Luke's uniform, his surroundings, everything really. But with Carl Gafford, it's a very different story. Everything is either blue or perhaps a pale kind of mauve colour, emphasising the coldness, not just of the location, but of the situation that Luke finds himself in. In fact, from this point until Luke gets back to Echo Base, we never see him coloured in anything other than some kind of shade of blue. Something we do see in the cave is the Hoth Wampa. Well, his arms anyway. Now, we didn't see much of the Hoth Wampa in the film, so maybe this is a reflection of that, or maybe they wanted a bit more secrecy around the creatures in the film anyway, or maybe there's something more to it. Because back at Echo Base, we see Han talking to one of the other soldiers about a dead Tauntaun, and the other soldier is saying something attacked one of the Tauntauns. Now, I don't know about you, but there's only one creature I know of that has a penchant for Tauntauns, the Wampas. So, were the Wampas supposed to have a bigger role in the film? Could they have done? Was it an abandoned plot point? Yes, to all of those. They did have a bigger role, and not just in the script, but there were also several scenes shot involving Wampas, attacking Echo Base. The rebels and the Imperial forces would end up fighting them. Some of the Wampas were trapped in a little kind of a cell in Echo Base. And a little brief clip of C-3PO ripping the warning sign off of that cell door is included in one of the earliest trailers for Empire Strikes Back. That plot point is retained in the comics adaptation, but it was dropped from the final version of the film. mainly due to the fact that they couldn't get the Wampus to look good enough on the screen, basically. The costumes, the effects just weren't good enough, weren't believable enough. So the decision was made to drop them. Now, of course, one of them at least had to remain because of Luke's storyline, but even his presence was kept to a minimum. Of course, Han finds Luke, unbeknownst to the rest of the rebels, and as the doors to Echo Base grind closed, C-3PO does nothing to improve the mood as he tells Leia that the chances of survival are 725 to 1. Now, who says that rewrites don't improve a script? Because what he then says, originally anyway, is, actually R2, I don't think we needed to know that. Which of course isn't a patch on the, of course R2 has been known to be wrong, from time to time line from the film, which shows that even though C-3PO has realised he said the wrong thing, he tries to kind of correct that mistake in the clumsiest way possible. Of course our heroes beat the odds, and as Luke is recovering, there's more talk between Han and Leia about creatures on Hoth, nasty natives that could be anywhere. Scratch that, Han, they're already in Echo Base, and we see a number of rebel troops fighting them, well, their arms anyway. Sometimes, to make the adaptation fit the format of the novel, they have to cut some panels in half or rearrange them. This is an example where the original panel really suffers from that, because not only is the original art cut in half, but it's even placed on two separate pages. And also, Carl Gafford's more blocky approach to colouring really doesn't help this scene. So the Wampus are attacking Echo Base. Or are they? Because we're told in the next panel that all unexplored cave areas should be immediately scanned. So did the Wampus hunt down the rebels? Or were the Wampus trapped by the rebels? Trapped in their own caves that haven't yet been fully explored? One thing that is hunting the rebels is the Probot. And here we have another interesting example of the effect that different approaches to colouring can have on a story. Because in the book, we see the Probot and we see an explosion, I guess, as Advanced Station 38 is somehow destroyed. In the comic, thanks to the colours, we see that the Probot actually shoots Advanced Station 38, and that is what destroys it. Now in the film, when Chewbacca and Han track down the first Probot and destroy it, I never really thought about how they got there. I think I probably just assumed they both rode there on Tauntauns. In this, however, we are shown that actually Chewbacca flew there. He flew a snowspeeder there. Seems a bit weird, but he is a great pilot, I suppose. Another great piece of art with great shading from Al Williamson shows us the rebels discussing their options, before we then see the Imperials discussing theirs. And there is a very small, but I think significant change to Darth Vader's dialogue here. Admiral Ozzel and Captain Piet are discussing whether or not it's worth investigating Hoth. And aside from the fact that they get the two characters the wrong way round, the most significant difference is that Darth Vader insists on them checking out Hoth because he says that is the one and Skywalker is there. Now, of course, in the film, he says that's it, the rebel base is there. And that small change actually makes a big change to the storyline, because suddenly all of this effort, the presence of the Imperial fleet, isn't because they're searching for the rebels, but because Darth Vader is searching for Skywalker. One element that the serialised version has that the other versions don't have is an extra title page for each of the 6 parts. And that's no different in the next part of the story, issue 40 of the Star Wars comic. And this not only gives us a little recap of what happened in the previous issue, but it sets the tone well for the upcoming epic battle between the rebels and the AT-AT walkers. The Wampus storyline is referenced again, as we're told that the creatures are now considered to be under control. And then we get another extra scene of Luke in the medical bay. And this serves to explain how the Bacta tank actually works. As medical droid 21B says, the Bacta are growing well. Those scars should be gone in a day or so. And then Luke and Leia have another moment. Now, if you weren't familiar with the larger story, you would think, based on the first film and the first, quarter of the second film, that Luke and Leia were the big romance of this story. There were a couple of romantic moments in the first film that certainly in the comics adaptation looked a lot more romantic. The kiss was a lot more romantic in the comics adaptation than the quick peck before the swing across the chasm in the first film. And now this moment, and of course another kiss that comes after this. You may even think, why does this hand guy keep butting in to the big romance of this story? But of course, George Lucas always had it in mind that they were brother and sister. Bullshit! Luckily, C-3PO does what he does best and spoils the mood. But not for long, because that kiss that I mentioned just now quickly follows. And this is a great example where you can see that the finished shots from the film were used as the basis of some of Al Williamson's art. Although for some reason Chewie has been taken out of the picture. The Empire have arrived, and as we know, they've made the error of coming out of light speed too close to Hoth. I've never understood what is wrong with that approach. As we know, it was Admiral Ozzel's decision to do that because he felt that surprise was wisest. Okay, fair enough. Okay, maybe it's wrong. But what advantage would there be in coming out of light speed further away so that the rebels had more time to kind of watch you slowly coming towards them? Why is that the wrong thing to do? Never understood it. Also on this page we have an interesting illustration of how comic book pages can be composed differently. We see this picture of Leia laid over the top of a background scene of Hoth itself. In the book, of course, different size page, a different shaped page, it's laid out very differently. Leia's picture is at the bottom of the page and the Hoth scene above it. But more to the point, her being moved has revealed a bit more of that picture. It just makes me think, what else is hidden behind her head? Because we know the illustration does continue on, because we can see the background on the other side of it. Leia is giving her speech to the pilots in Echo Base, and we know that Han and Chewie are there working on the Millennium Falcon, and we know that it doesn't go well. As we see Han shout out, all right, so that doesn't do it. I think I prefer, turn it off! Then the attack on Echo Base begins. We have a nice build-up, and we also have a couple of extra bits. One of them features in all three versions, and that is the addition of this rebel scout on a Tauntaun who tries to warn his colleagues that the AT-ATs are advancing on their position. Then we have this full-page splash view of an AT-AT with its guns blazing. Now this isn't an addition to the storyline, but it is an addition to this version. Because this full page splash, it doesn't feature in the novelised version, and it isn't even in the magazine version. Now that is really curious, and I wonder if it's because the page count for this specific issue was one short, and so they had to add something, and they added a whole extra piece of artwork. Actually, this entire battle scene on Hoth is done really well, and we get to see a bit more artistic juggling as they try to fit the different panels from the comic scale into that smaller book, as AT-ATs swap places or are copied and pasted from earlier panels. Of course, the rebels have some success and take down one of the AT-ATs, but before long, Luke's snowspeeder is downed and he is at the mercy of another walker. As well as the great battle scenes, this issue also features a really good cover. That tradition continues straight away with issue 41 and a cover that shows the Millennium Falcon in the meteor field. This image alone just reminds you what a great film it was. Not that we need reminding, of course. Luke still has that AT-AT to deal with, and there's a good little sequence here which shows why comic adaptations don't need to try to copy exactly what they see on the screen. In the film, we saw what looked like basically a doll being winched up to the underside of the walker. Here we have a selection of slightly different angles, and we see Luke plunging into shadow. In the book, it's laid out slightly differently, but still a good, effective sequence. And like I say, it doesn't match exactly what we saw on the screen. But why should it? That was a film, this is a comic. They work differently. We're told that Luke uses his laser blade to cut open the underbelly of the AT-AT. Surely they know by now that the term lightsaber wasn't just an off-the-cuff remark. That's what it is. It's a lightsaber. not a laser blade. They do go to the effort of explaining why that charge is more potent with Luke sticking it underneath the attack than if it was dropped onto the attack from the snowspeeders. And it certainly is potent, as it spectacularly takes out the walker. I know I've mentioned the differences in colouring choices between these different versions a couple of times. But here, as the rebels begin to evacuate Echo Base, including Leia and Han, we see, I don't know, is it small? Maybe, but I think it illustrates how a colouring decision can actually change an element of the story. A small element, but it's interesting to see nonetheless. As we all know, our hero's escape route is cut off when one of the corridors collapses. Here we see the aftermath with, I don't know what, smoke, dust rising up. Of course, it's the same in the magazine version, although the colours are stronger. Carl Gafford takes a different approach, and suddenly there's a fire in the corridor. Maybe I'm placing more importance on it than it merits, but I do think it's interesting that just through the choice of colour, an element of the story is changed from us having a collapsed corridor to a collapsed corridor that is on fire. Of course, our heroes are trying to get the Millennium Falcon up and running, which is proving to be a bit of a struggle. And Leia comes out with her classic, "Would it help if I got it unpushed?" Which Han ignores. What? There wasn't space for a word balloon saying it might? At least we get to see Han saying, "Punch it, Chewie," as indeed the Falcon does escape the clutches of the Empire. On the planet's surface, at least, because before too long they encounter the orbiting Star Destroyers. We know the only way to escape them is by making the jump to light speed. And Han says, "Oh yeah? Watch this." Did you just do the sound effect? By now, Luke is on his way to Dagobah. And, oh my word, he over-explains it to R2. "Yes, I heard about it from Ben Kenobi when I was wounded and wandering in that blizzard back on Hoth. But trust me, R2, this isn't a relapse. Even though Dagobah isn't on any navigational charts, I know where I'm going. I'll get us there safely. It isn't far." Oh, don't give him the oxygen. The rest of our heroes have now been plunged into the asteroid field. Thanks to C-3PO, we know they don't stand a good chance of surviving. Although a better chance than in the film, where C-3PO says that it's 3,720 to 1. There are plenty of familiar lines in this sequence, such as, "You aren't actually going into an asteroid field," and "You don't have to do this to impress me," and "You said you wanted to be there when I was wrong." But also some familiar lines come out of unfamiliar mouths. And it's another interesting insight into the filmmaking process, the decisions that are made, things that are changed. Because contrary to what's shown here, in the film it's Princess Leia that says that they're going to get pulverised if they stay there much longer. And Han says that he isn't going to argue with that. I suppose it's possible that they made a mistake when they did the adaptation. Or maybe there were different takes, with the two characters saying each other's lines. And discussions were had and decisions made about, well, who would it suit better to say this? Who would be more likely to say this in this situation? Shortly after this, as Han spots a nice big meteor, Leia starts to get a bit cryptic. Han tells Chewie to get a reading on it, and Leia says, "What is it?" And then she says, "Han, do you hear?" "What?" And then she's cut off as they descend into the cave. Do you hear what? Did she think that Han wasn't listening to her? Or had she heard something, some kind of telltale sign from the cave that they were descending into? It isn't explained. We have one more page in this half of the adaptation, and it's a good one as well, as Luke lands on Dagobah. As he battles through the fog, he says he was certain he saw a beacon just before, but maybe it was just wishful thinking. Well, bearing in mind that in the film you specifically say that there are no traces of technology at all, then yeah, I think it is wishful thinking. Then we get our first proper look at the swamps of Dagobah, and they look great. But the question is, who is this bandy-legged stranger? We're at the halfway point of our tale, and so far, apart from the Hoth Wampa subplot, you may be thinking, well, we haven't seen anything particularly different to what we saw on the screen. You may also be thinking, okay, some of the dialogue is different, but they haven't butchered any classic lines. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, stay tuned, because all of that is about to change.